Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Let's Talk UNRWA. I am Layla Mukhaber, UNRWA USA's Director of Communications, and your host for today's hour. We have a special guest for today's episode, Mr. Thomas White, who you see on screen. He's the Director of Affairs in Gaza for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, not to be confused with UNRWA USA, our organization. We featured Mr. White sometime last year, and we're really delighted to host him again while he's in Washington for a few days. A quick refresher on our program. Let's Talk UNRWA is a monthly speaker series that's live streamed on UNRWA USA's social media channels, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And our goal is to provide you all with an insider view of the agency's work on the ground. It's also a unique opportunity for you to hear directly from UNRWA staff who work in the field as well as here in the United States. Mr. White oversees UNRWA's largest operating field, which is Gaza, the Gaza Strip, providing food assistance to 1.2 million Palestine refugees and educating over 300,000 girls and boys in its over 284 schools, just in that field alone. Tom's visit comes at a very critical moment. Just 2 weeks ago on June 9th, UNRWA informed the UN General Assembly members that it does not have the funds to keep its schools, health centers, and other services running after September. So Tom is briefing on the urgent need for the United States government to obligate the $75 million provided in the fiscal year 2023 foreign aid spending bill for food assistance in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, as well as the Gaza Strip. And UNRWA urgently needs these funds to maintain the food pipeline to over 1 million refugees in Gaza. Absent these funds, the UNRWA pipeline breaks as early as mid-September. So with Mr. Thomas White here with us today and give us an update. He's here to give us an update on the current visit here in the States and the situation on the ground in Gaza. Thank you so much for your time, Tom, and for being with us today. And thank you for your service to UNRWA.
Thanks, Layla. It's great to join you, and also really great to join supporters of UNRWA USA. I can assure you that it's much appreciated in Gaza, and I'm very conscious of the focus that UNRWA USA and supporters of UNRWA USA provide to Gaza and what it's like for refugees living in Gaza. So maybe I'll start off with sharing with you a bit of a perspective on Gaza. The situation remains very, very difficult for refugees in Gaza, and of course, in Gaza, 70% of the population are refugees. So if I use the Gaza community or refugee community interchangeably, that's because essentially it is a refugee community, and that sense of loss and dispossession is sort of carried by that population, particularly as they continue to live in circumstances of right now extreme poverty, and also with very little sense of what the future holds. I mean, there is no political horizon right now, and that means that the role of UNRWA is sort of doubly important. People really hold very dear not only the services that UNRWA provide, but really see UNRWA as a lifeline. It's been the only constant in their lives over decades, really now, and it particularly relates to things such as education. A father, very soon after I arrived in Gaza, said to me, I'm a refugee. I live in Gaza. I cannot provide my children any property. I cannot provide them a country. The only thing I can give them is education. And he was making that point to me because that education comes from UNRWA and is exceptionally important to the refugee community. So later, as you said, our core work here is really around education. So close on 300,000 young people receiving an education with UNRWA, 1.2 million people regularly accessing our healthcare services. I note it's not the full number of refugees because, of course, particularly men are very bad at accessing healthcare and regularly seeing the doctors. But I can assure you our clinics are very, very busy, mother and child clinics, right through to looking after elderly people. So there are 1.2 million people who get their healthcare from UNRWA. We also are providing services to some of the most vulnerable in the community, including other services such as water and sanitation for those people who still live in the camp environments. The situation in Gaza, I'd like to say it's improved. It hasn't improved. We're now into the 17th year of the economic, and I'd also say social blockade of Gaza.
Absolutely.
Essentially, the economy has been destroyed in Gaza, and that's having a profound impact upon people. But also, it's the sense of isolation. People cannot travel freely from to or from Gaza, and like young people everywhere in the world, they've got aspirations to go and travel and explore the world and study and work, and those opportunities are not available for people in Gaza, and particularly young people. The economic blockade, I think has really damaged families' ability to put in place financial coping mechanisms. Year on year, people in their families started losing their jobs. They started selling off possessions. They started going into debt. They've exhausted most of their coping mechanisms. So the current economic situation is really biting very hard. Gazans now have a per capita GDP of just over $1,000 US, and that puts them well behind their neighbours. Even in the West Bank, the per capita GDP is over $4,000, and it's a similar level in Jordan. And I was thinking maybe it's similar level to Egypt, which has a very large population to support. But in fact, even the Egypt has a per capita GDP which is 3 times that of Gaza. So Gaza now has a per capita GDP similar to poorer countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Mm. Now, of course, there's also a very dysfunctional market because of the economic blockade, which means that any of the productive capacity of Gaza has long since gone, particularly because it relies upon trading relationships outside of just the domestic market in Gaza. So now, for example, only 18% of the GDP of Palestine is produced in Gaza, yet there's well over 40% of the population actually live in Gaza. So the economic situation is very tough. I mean, I think I really find it heartbreaking when you're out in the communities and you're speaking to young people, and they've worked so hard at school. Many of them, their families have gone into debt to try and get them some higher education, and they're entering a job market where there's 70% unemployment for young people. Now, even if you get a job, and I was speaking to a young storekeeper up in Jabalia recently, works a 10-hour day, 6 days a week. He's earning 20 shekels. So let's say $4 US a day. I was speaking to a young lawyer in a law firm in Gaza City, fully qualified lawyer, going on to study remotely a master's degree in law, doesn't have an employment contract, is paid $300 a month. It is exceptionally tough for young people in Gaza. This is then translated into the fact that we continue to have rising rates of food insecurity. So now, over 40% of the population are what we call severely food secure. That means they're regularly going a day without a meal. So, the humanitarian situation, is not getting any better in Gaza, and it is really tough on individuals. It's tough on families. Just to put bread on the table these days. So, to sum that up, people in Gaza are impoverished. They're isolated. Increasingly, they're now hungry. But the other aspect that we might actually come back to is, I'd like to talk a bit more about this, but, increasingly they're also traumatized. And, we need to remember that, the people of Gaza are living through an ongoing conflict, and we're regularly reminded of, at these times where there's an escalation or a flare up of the conflict. And, we had one last week where, everybody in Gaza is, suddenly worried for their lives, literally, as there's rocket fire and airstrikes in and around, neighborhoods, suburban neighborhoods in Gaza. So it's very tough for the people of Gaza right now.
Thank you, Tom, so much for painting that picture. I think you really put in perspective, even for someone like me who has had the rare privilege of going to Gaza now several times. I think I've been 6 times to Gaza through my work with UNRWA USA, but the way that you compared it to the other areas in the region, I think really helps us to have that understanding and relate it to ourselves. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I want to talk more about the food insecurity that you mentioned, as it is a crisis that we keep getting reports on. Given the severity of that situation, I would love for a little bit more of an overview on that crisis. How many refugees, again, are relying on food assistance in Gaza? How many are really facing hunger? And what are UNRWA's needs to address that crisis that UNRWA USA supporters might be able to respond to?
So, Layla, what I might do is just, follow on from my last comments, and that really is to, a firm sense that the people of Gaza, and particularly the young people, do not want to be coming to an UNRWA distribution centre to collect rations for their families. I've worked with refugee communities around the world. I find the Palestine refugees in Gaza are very proud people, exceptionally resourceful. They value education, very entrepreneurial. And, the message from young people in Gaza is not, I want a handout of food. They want a job. They want to enjoy a life by providing for themselves. They want to be able to work. They want to be able to build their future. So, in some regards, the first thing I'd say is, this is not a reflection upon the people of Gaza. It's the circumstances that they are having to deal with. And that, I think that for a very proud people, it's tough to say, actually, we need food assistance. But the reality is, because of the economic blockade of Gaza and the systemic destruction of the economy, there are no opportunities, and now people do require a food aid. So we are currently providing 50% of the calorific need for 1.2 million people. This is complemented by a World Food Program for 300,000 people that provides food vouchers for about 300,000 non-refugees. So but in essence, 3 out of 4 Gazans are relying on support from the international community for 50 to 60% of their calorific need. This is literally putting bread on the table. Now, because of the market dynamics that are associated with the economic blockade of Gaza, we are actually bringing in those foodstuffs into Gaza. So we are buying it on the international market, and we ship it to Israel, and then bring it via trucks in through Kerem Shalom in the south of the Gaza Strip. It then goes to a big warehouse near Rafah in southern Gaza, where it's then broken up, distributed to about 15 distribution centres, where it's further broken down. And we, through our Cash for Work program, people have the opportunity over a 3-month period to work in those distribution centres, preparing the rations, and then on a rolling cycle over 3 months, 1.2 million people receive or come to the distribution centres to receive their family rations. The really worrying thing at the present time, and then is the major reason for my trip to Washington right now, is that at this stage, we're facing a break in the food pipeline in September. What we really need is to ensure that this congressional appropriation is obligated. This $75 million will then enable us to fulfill the orders that food that we're placing on the international market, and will ensure the food supply in Gaza through to the end of Q1 next year. Now, obviously, this food aid is very important because the consequences of the community not receiving that food assistance, if that food pipeline was to break, are quite dire. So that's essentially why I'm here in Washington, and it's to speak with people in Congress, and also speak to people in government about the importance of this money for the people of Gaza.
Thank you for the work that you're doing to that regard, and I do hope that we see a positive response from our United States government in obligating those funds. It's an utter shame and quite cruel, in my opinion, that organizations like World Food Program and UNRWA don't have funding from the international community as they should to fund these basic needs. And we're talking about, rice, flour, oil, sugar, very basic staples, pantry staples. And folks from our community know that because they fundraise for that during our Ramadan campaign every single year. We're very pleased at the response from our community, and we'd love to see that same level of support reflected in our government. I say that as UNRWA USA. And, we thank our community, actually, on that note, for a groundbreaking campaign this past Ramadan, which just ended about a month or so ago, raised over $1 million in food assistance, particularly for Gaza. And it's just a beautiful reflection of the solidarity of the people here and the growing solidarity we're seeing in our communities. So thank you. I want to talk a little bit more about funding on that note. Given that UNRWA's programs rely very heavily on voluntary funding, it is a temporary agency meant to address a temporary problem. 75 years later, there is no end in sight. And so we need sustainable funding to keep UNRWA going to provide for these basic needs of refugees, that the needs that every human deserves to have met. So organizations like UNRWA USA are one of the organizations that support, but donor countries, UN member states, how challenging has it been, Tom, to secure funding for the programs provided to refugees in Gaza in this particular year?
Yeah, no, look, I think this year has been particularly difficult. UNRWA, over a number of years, the level of funding has not kept pace with the need. Obviously, population is certainly growing in Gaza. We continue to enroll more students in grade 1 than we did the previous year. So we feel the effects very acutely because, we have a growing student population. We need more teachers. We need more schools. So funding levels have not kept pace with the need. Over a number of years, we put in some efficiency measures to try and save money, which was successful. It then moved into what are essentially austerity measures. And, I know that austerity measures have been a topic of discussion, in many governments around the world, but, they were very deep for UNRWA. And we were having to make some very, very difficult choices about, how we continued services. Now, to give you a sense of that in Gaza, it meant that we stopped hiring full-time teachers. Essentially what we did is the small percentage of casual teachers that we used to employ, we started employing, rather than replacing a retiree or where we had more classes, putting in place another regular employee, we started employing a casual teacher. And, it was designed as a short-term measure, but over many years, we got to a point where, 15% of our workforce are casual teachers, and if you're trying to run a school system in any other place, that starts becoming unmanageable. We were not investing in our healthcare workforce, and we're operating with a 40% gap in our healthcare workforce. We were supplementing that with a graduate training program funded out of our emergency appeal, with providing short-term opportunities for recent doctor and nurse graduates but it doesn't make it doesn't fill the gap of having a regular full-time nurse or doctor in those health clinics. So we went through a period of these very difficult austerity measures, which really started cutting into the quality of services for refugees. But this year, we are, the what I'd say is the strategic deficit, so the systemic deficit of UNRWA, is now over $200 million, which really, and our Commissioner General has been highlighting this in recent weeks, particularly at the recent pledging conference in New York, that we don't think that we'll be able to pay salaries from September. Now, what does that mean for Gaza? It means, are we able to open up our schools? Can we maintain health services and water and sanitation services? So it is a very, very difficult funding environment this year, and probably more so than previous years.
It's the uncertainty. I can't even imagine, especially given the fact that the overwhelming majority of your staff at the agency are refugees themselves who are living in the communities that they serve, and UNRWA is providing livelihoods to folks who otherwise have no prospects, as we spoke about the levels of poverty. So I certainly hope that the United States will be a leader in this effort, and others will follow suit. We saw for many years there was a defunding from the U.S. government under the previous administration, and it is my hope as an American that is to change, so these can be sustained. And I want to talk more about, the advocacy that UNRWA USA does around refugee mental health, food assistance, like we spoke about, and emergency in Gaza in response to various Israeli military assaults and other emergencies. What are the priority programs that UNRWA has implemented to support the refugee population? You spoke a little bit about this, but could you maybe highlight a success story or something very impactful that you've experienced in your last 2 years with UNRWA?
I mean, I would always go back to education. You can be in some of the poorer areas of the Gaza Strip, and follow the kids early in the morning, and they're weaving their way through the alleyways because they're heading to an UNRWA school, and you suddenly come across this big white building. It's got a UN flag on it. It's they enter the gates, and it's like entering a different world. Even simple things like this sense of physical space once you're inside the schoolyard, despite the fact there are probably 1,000 kids in the schoolyard, right, still the urban space opens up, and kids, it really is like a haven, for children to be children, and to learn and grow, have some fun as well. So I think our schools are really an enormous success. The other thing I remind our teams are, we are delivering education essentially in a war zone. What I'm asking of our school principals is, I want you to run a UN school in Gaza, and support some of kids from a very, very impoverished communities. But at the same time, I also want you to be prepared to convert your school into a shelter for displaced people during a war. These schools really, for me, are a symbol of what UNRWA is about, and it is about focusing on young people. It is a place, for learning, but also it's a place for sanctuary. And I don't think we can underestimate how important that UN flag is for the people of Gaza, because in times of war, they shelter under that flag. But for the parents of children in Gaza, it represents the chance of a better future for their kids, because they value the education kids are getting in Gaza enormously. So I think education is for me a standout always. I'm also very proud that if you're a refugee in Gaza, you have health outcomes as if you were living in a middle income country, yet you're living in a country with, as I said earlier, with an economy which is putting you amongst some of the poorer countries in the world. But one area that really is emerging, which I think our teams are very proud of, is trying to connect young people in Gaza to the digital economy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that young people of Gaza really need much encouragement. I mean, as I said, they're very well educated, very entrepreneurial, heaps of get up and go. We are literally partnering with them to give them access to some training, and that's through our vocational training colleges in terms of learning programming skills, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
Some basic introductions to working as a freelance technician in the IT sector.
Mm-hmm.
But what we've also done recently is realise that there was an opportunity for us to essentially, we've set up what is essentially a social business, and it is an IT sort of service centre that is servicing other UN agencies. So through the UN International Computing Centre, the team in Gaza are holding contracts with other UN agencies. So, if you visit the centre and you take some time to walk around the staff who are working, and at any one time there are about 150 full-time staff working, which makes this sort of social business the largest IT employer in Gaza, and they are servicing clients from around the world. So I was up there recently, and two young women really stand out to me. One woman, young woman, was she had provided all of the IT support for the registration for the COP meetings that were held in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people from around the world registering, and all of the administration for the attendees at COP. Another young woman, she works on a contract with UNDP, and she is supporting all of the data that goes into measuring countries' achievements against the Sustainable Development Goals. And they're just two examples of young people in the IT service centre who are servicing clients from around the world, software development, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what's interesting, you chat to them and people sort of, ask them, oh, so where are you sitting? And they expect them to sort of say, maybe somewhere in an IT service center in India or something. They said, no, I'm sitting in Gaza. And people are really blown away by this, but I find it just such a great way of demonstrating to people outside of Gaza that the young people of Gaza have got enormous potential, and in many regards, they share the same aspirations and dreams that young people share elsewhere in the world. So for me, that is a really bright spot. And of course, it's an area that we're trying to really work on, and we're trying to bring partners in to help build the digital economy for Gaza. And you may ask why, and I think it's one industry in which young people of Gaza are not restricted by the economic blockade. There is an opportunity for them to either freelance as an IT consultant essentially, or in fact work for IT companies, global IT companies, and we are looking at doing a range of things under sort of this program around digital futures, which will try and sort of culminate with a sort of a tech conference in Gaza that brings together the tech industry in Gaza, but also interested parties from overseas. Now, it might be difficult to get people into Gaza for obvious reasons, but we can join online. And here we really want to, we don't have the answers here, but it is connecting the tech community in Gaza with the tech community outside of Gaza to say, actually, how do we make this work? There's an enormous resource there. And so, we are looking to build partnerships that bring new ideas and new thinking to to the young people of Gaza interested in this sector. We'd also be looking at partnerships with companies that want to do business in Gaza in the tech sector, but also potentially some funding partnerships so we can develop the capacity of either our training centres so that they can be delivering more courses so that young people can learn how to code in the latest language, and so their skills are marketable straight away, or in fact looking at developing our IT service centre. So it's really a bit of a tech hub to bring together the community in Gaza. So that's another bright spot, Layla.
I'm so glad that you mentioned the Digital Futures Initiative, Tom, especially. I was thinking of questions I wanted to ask you.
Okay.
Thinking a lot about it at our organization. I see Jason Terry, our Director of Strategic Programs, is tuned in. And of course, a lot of this work is being led by Jason, as well as our Executive Director, who is not in the office this week. That's why I'm here taking her place as host. But as I learned more about the way that UNRWA and UNRWA USA are coming together to really drive innovation and create income generating opportunities in Gaza, it's really, it gives me hope. I know it might be naive to say because we just painted a very bleak picture, of course, in the first half of our interview, but I think if the community comes together and these partners and companies you mentioned really want to do something to address this unsustainable issue, this unsustainable poverty, I hope that they come together around this. And I'm really excited to share in the future kind of the details around this conference that's in the works. I don't know what is shareable yet, but I know it's meant to happen sometime in early November. So if folks are interested to know more, I encourage them to write to us. And as Mara often says, Gaza's under both a land, air, and sea blockade, and it seems that maybe one of the only ways to circumvent the blockade is through the cloud. And I'm really grateful for the work UNRWA does in the IT Center, which I got the chance to visit actually last summer. And I was blown away by every person I met there, from the directors to the staff and the projects. And I know, one of the apps they had built was a yoga app, right? That you can download in the App Store and utilize. And this was made by people in Gaza. It's so neat. And I just think it's the future for the people of Palestine and particularly Gaza.
And Layla, it's not just for me. It's also meeting young women who are going into business in Gaza. I had the opportunity the other day. A young woman who had done was one of our first young women to go through our mobile phone repair course at the Gaza Training Center, and initially, she went out and she was struggling to find an opportunity until she realised that women in Gaza don't want to hand over their phone to a male technician. So she has set up a business now where she exclusively services women who want to have their mobile phone repaired.
That's amazing.
She has just, you can just see that entrepreneurial spark when you speak to her. The ideas are buzzing around her head, and these young people are really leading the way in terms of a new way of thinking for Gaza, but are going to be so important for supporting so many families. As the primary breadwinner for so many families in Gaza.
Absolutely. A few trips back, way before the pandemic, I had the chance to bring a philanthropic advisor for Madonna to Gaza.
Okay.
And that was a really cool experience. This average white American from California, and he left saying Gaza is the most entrepreneurial place on the planet. That was his takeaway, being in Gaza for 2, maybe 3 days.
Yeah.
And this is a person who, Palestine isn't his number one issue. This is something that was a little bit fresh to him. And just by visiting UNRWA facilities, classrooms, and not even the IT service center, because I don't think it existed back then. Yeah. We met with folks who had benefited through the Gaza Gateway program that UNRWA originally launched, and Gaza Sky Geeks, other organizations that complement the work that UNRWA is doing in the tech space. And that was the takeaway, and I never forgot it. So it is just true.
So we need to help build the Silicon Strip.
Yeah. I mean, I hope the people who are watching write that down, but we need to be doing that. And is there a way, maybe a small way even that Americans could be actively supporting and contributing to the success of digital futures, in your opinion? Maybe a specific need around training or job placement, perhaps equipment? I don't know if that's something you can speak to.
Yeah. So look, I mean, I just sort of really come back to that sense that we are looking for the latest ideas. I don't think that we pretend that we've got the answers, but we want to help partner, people, organisations in the tech sector with the emerging young talent in Gaza. So that's the first thing. Something around ideas.
Sure.
I think there is an enormous opportunity for some partnerships with the private sector, with some young people who are setting up their own small sort of startups in Gaza, through to what I think will be an enormous resource of young people who can work for companies in the tech industry.
Hire from Gaza, folks.
Exactly. And finally, there are opportunities for some direct support, and I really feel that it is helping us. We don't want to be leading the tech sector. I mean, the community will find its own way. It's really, how do we support them? And we do see a major place being either in helping training and making sure that people have got access to the right skills, or some of the ideas and plans we have around this, expanding the IT service centre so it can become a bit of a tech hub. I mean, simple things such as, one of the major issues is getting access to a stable internet connection. And that could be facilitated through a hub, but also a place where because a lot of them, a lot of these people are working remotely, it's a place where that people can come together and exchange ideas and work together on solutions, either for the Gaza industry or taking some ideas overseas.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. I just have a few more questions for you before we let you go. I know you've had a very long 2 days and a quick trip here in Washington, so we really value your time. I want to talk and shift back a bit to mental health and the crisis that is being faced in Gaza. As our viewers know, UNRWA USA hosts an annual walk-run, 5-kilometer walk-run called the Gaza 5K in several American cities around the country. Most recently, we had a phenomenal turnout in Washington, D.C., our first in-person event in Washington, D.C. In the last 4 years due to the pandemic. So huge shout out to my fellow neighbors in the DMV for going above and beyond. But we have another opportunity upcoming on September 30 in the Bay Area. So I would like to know, Tom, if you can explain perhaps how UNRWA contributes to fostering hope and resilience amongst the refugee community when it comes to mental health programming.
Yeah. So Layla, I've been in Gaza now for 2 years, just coming up 2 years. And I was struck. Well, one of the first things that really struck me about arriving in Gaza and starting to speak to the community, starting to speak to families, refugees, children, was this issue of mental health. And it came up time and time and time again. And I've never been in a place where people were speaking about it so openly, but you got the sense that it was, one of the biggest issues the community were facing. And then, as I started to sort of understand the situation, it was realizing that, people have been living, certainly in recent times, have been living through essentially an ongoing conflict, and obviously it's punctuated by these escalations. But, the level of trauma in the community is obviously very high. And I'm not a psychologist, but this sense that, some of the mechanisms we put in place to deal with that trauma, continually get interrupted by the next round of conflict. And there are just, horrible stories that you hear about families during these flare-ups in the conflict, where these escalations, these short wars, with, a staff member telling me that she and her sister exchanged children. So, she sent one of her daughters to her sister's house sent one of their children, so that if, their house got hit, somebody from their family would survive, or another staff member who, he's a reasonably sort of tough guy, but he was telling me literally with tears in his eyes that, as the conflict was ongoing, they had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And so he said, I just sat in my living room with my family and held on to my family, and we just sat out the night. And, that is being replayed in families across Gaza, every night of these conflicts. And so it's taking an enormous toll on the people of Gaza. And so after the 21 war, as kids entered our school for the first time in grade 1, we did a study and looked at the sort of, particularly the mental health markers around trauma.
Right.
And we were seeing very, very high numbers of children who were exhibiting signs of trauma. The academic who helped us put together the study has just recently back doing a follow-up of that study, and it's going to be released soon, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of it's actually going to be a PhD dissertation, and I'll make sure.
Am I correct to think that it's linked somehow to California school? Maybe I'm thinking.
No, this is through the Sigmund Freud University in Berlin.
Oh, okay.
And so I'll make sure it's available if any of your supporters would like to have a look at it once it's released. But it's essentially saying that 38% of the children in our schools are exhibiting signs of significant trauma. And then and I was talking to the academic recently, and she's finalising the study. You start looking at the indicators that the markers, and they're all things that are associated with PTSD, post-traumatic stress. And she was very quick to point out to me, Tom, yes, this is very serious. What you are seeing is, in fact, PTSD's effects or symptoms. But she was very quick to remind me that we can't call it PTSD because there's no post. And I think that's part of the problem, is that it's the cumulative effects where people don't have the chance to recover.
Right.
Now, that places enormous demands upon our teachers and also our health staff. And so we have increased the number of counsellors we have in schools, the counsellors we have in our health clinics, and it's giving them specific training so that they understand how to identify and how to also try and treat or provide tools for people to cope with these mental health challenges. But it feels like you're holding back the tide in many regards because it's such a large issue. So that's an area that we definitely need more support in, and the community need more support. Hopefully this study will also help us understand, the best ways to help the unique situation of people in Gaza. But there are also, other ways. We're going to run summer fun weeks this year. We've already had over 125,000 students from our schools who've enrolled from some fun weeks, and it is designed to be fun. That's why we call it summer fun weeks. It's sports activities, it's art and craft and drawing and jumping castles and water fights and all of that sort of stuff, letting kids just be kids. Mm-hmm. But there's also a serious side to it, which is, there are mental health counsellors in every school where we run the summer fun weeks. There is some group sessions to help them with understanding this issue and coping mechanisms, but also identifying children for follow-up, one-on-one counselling. So we are very appreciative not only of the funding that UNRWA USA is providing on the issue of mental health in Gaza, but also the advocacy role, making sure that people in the United States understand that the mental toll that this conflict is taking on Palestinians.
Thank you, Tom. It is probably the program I care about the most personally. And, I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary at UNRWA USA, which is very exciting. But I would love to host less and less Gaza 5Ks because we've gotten to a point where we've really addressed and found a stopping to this issue.
Yeah.
But until that happens, I do hope that people sign up in large numbers for the 5K. Again, we're having the September 30th event in the Bay Area. We will be launching registration for that soon. We encourage people to come from all across the US or to participate virtually. In fact, the last 5K that we did, we had folks in Gaza wearing our Gaza 5K shirts. We now have content producers on the ground in Gaza who are creating content for us and sharing stories of these folks, including of the mental health counselors. And it was very cool to see that solidarity worn on their sleeves, literally, between people in Gaza and people here in Washington. And the summer fun weeks, I wish I had summer fun weeks as a kid myself. It was just a delight to be there with Diala. We made fast friends with the girls at the schools we attended. We got to see Tom, are you there with me still?
I'm still with you now. Yeah.
I think I lost internet connection for a moment, but I do encourage folks to go back to UNRWA USA's Instagram to see some of the sites from Summer Fun Weeks. And if we're back this summer, we hope to visit them as well so we can share those inspiring and uplifting vignettes of Gaza. Okay, last two questions.
Okay.
So, Tom, as Director of UNRWA Affairs in Gaza, can you describe really what life in the camps, the refugee camps, would look like without UNRWA services? I would think it would really help for our American viewers to gain a better understanding of just how significant the role of the agency is on the ground.
Yeah. So I would say that this extends beyond the camps because 70% of the population are refugees. Only about 1 in 3 refugees in Gaza live in the camp. But it's interesting, we talk about the camps. In fact, quite often the lines between where the camp starts and where the camp ends is blurred in Gaza. And I think of Jabalia up in the north. There are 125,000 people who live in the boundaries of the old camp. Of course, it doesn't look like a camp now.
Right.
People over the years have built very simple, structures, expanding on the original 2-room shelters that were built by UNRWA in the 1950s. So there's 125,000 people within the old boundaries of the camp and another 100,000 refugees living on the outskirts of the camp. So for both the camp and the non-camp population, which I continually having to ask my driver, are we in the camp yet? So it's not like we understand camps in other parts of the world.
Right.
Life, as I was saying earlier, remains very, very challenging. And, essentially a life for those refugees communities in Gaza without UNRWA is really no other option for education for their children. So that's going to be the major issue of currently just under 300,000 children enrolled in our schools and several thousand young people enrolled in our vocational training centres. That opportunity is not there. And I know the refugees really value education. So that's going to be a major issue. The general health of the population would rapidly start declining. I mean, essential things such as, being able to take your new child into the child maternal nurse and make sure they start on their program of vaccinations. The simple things that are about maintaining a healthy life will not be available. And what is left of the public health system through the Palestinian Authority in Gaza is not going to be able to support 1.2 million refugees in Gaza. But then there's also a range of other services, sort of some social services to some of the more vulnerable in the community. I would be very concerned about the situation for water and sanitation. Mm-hmm. Particularly in this case, it is in the camp environments. People's access to potable water and also sanitation, removal of solid waste. Mm-hmm. We would have a we would have a major public health crisis if those services cease to exist for those populations. And then, of course, because of the situation in Gaza with the ongoing conflict and the economic situation, and obviously the reason I'm here in Washington is the importance of food aid right now. Of course, refugees would prefer to be working, but under the current circumstances, they're relying upon this food aid. But it's also some of the recovery work that we've completed after recent wars, and we've just finished a building program that repaired or rebuilt over 7,000 houses in Gaza after the April 21 conflict. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the services that would not be provided and the impact of families who are don't have access to adequate housing. There's no water and sanitation in their community. There's nowhere to send their kids to school, and they can't get their children vaccinated.
Yeah, and no way to leave Gaza under blockade as well.
Well, and I think that's and I think that is that, Layla, you said it very accurately. I mean, unlike other circumstances where people would get up and move, you are trapped in Gaza. There is nowhere to go, and they have to survive within the circumstances that are placed in front of them.
Thank you, Tom. Lastly, I want to ask you how you think we in the United States, both through our government and our people, can better support the work of the agency. Is there a specific action that you think would be particularly impactful, maybe now, in strengthening American support for UNRWA's mission?
I think that at a sort of, dare I say, political level, I think it's important that, for people who are interested in supporting UNRWA, actually it's about supporting Palestine refugees is more to the point, is, demonstrating, your support to UNRWA USA, or in fact, ensuring that your representatives in Washington understand the importance of UNRWA. I think that's a very tangible sort of political or advocacy action that people can take. And the other thing is, get behind UNRWA USA. I mean, go to a fund run, get involved in their fundraising activities, because I can assure you on the ground in Gaza, it makes a difference. There are mental health programs for kids in Gaza that would not be occurring if it was not for the generosity of people in the United States who are supporting Palestine refugees through UNRWA USA. So probably they're the two main things that I could suggest.
Thank you, Tom. And we pledge to continue that for as long as necessary. We want to thank you so much again for speaking to us about your current visit here in Washington, D.C. and the latest conditions on the ground in Gaza. I encourage anyone watching this program, either in the live broadcast or the rebroadcast, to share it with folks who might not have an understanding of what the situation is, as Tom so beautifully and poignantly described. On behalf of our entire UNRWA USA team, we really appreciate the time that you took after even the workday to share with our listeners how they can better support the agency's work in the region. We really extend our gratitude and solidarity with all of the staff on the ground, particularly those who are also refugees. And on that note, I'd like to remind everyone once again to keep your eye on Palestine and its refugees, to continue showing your solidarity with Palestine refugees by supporting organizations like UNRWA USA. And to all those tuned in from the West Coast, we are having our Gaza 5K to support the mental health needs of Palestine refugees on Saturday, September 30th. Please keep an eye out and make sure you're on our email list so you get registration details once we launch. You can also support UNRWA USA by making a one-time financial donation through our website. You can become a monthly solidarity sustainer, or advocating for the continuation of UNRWA's work by contacting your member of Congress through our website, unrwausa.org, as you see on the screen. This is also a reminder, as always, as Director of Communications, I must ask you to follow us on social media at UNRWA USA. If you want to follow the agency's work, that's at UNRWA, and stay up to date with our latest. Thank you again, Mr. White, and thank you for all of you who tuned in to the live show.
Thank you, Layla.